What's up, peoples? How you doing today? Took a little bit of motivation for me to set up my camera and make a video today because I haven't been very inspired lately to talk to the camera or YouTube, and that's probably a good thing because generally I tend to ramble on about things that are really irrelevant to most people, and that's what I do. I have my own thoughts. I'm just a human being in my own little world, and I'm trying to convey some of my thoughts to the world, and sometimes people agree, sometimes they don't agree. I'm not here to be agreeable, of course. Um, in fact, I'm pretty much the opposite of agreeable in a lot of ways to people as far as the way I'm perceived by folks. They might think I'm a contrarian, and often I am. I will argue against, play the devil's advocate and argue against some of my own views just to kind of poke and prod and figure out exactly how other people feel and why they feel the way they feel. Because to me, understanding humans is, I think, probably the most important thing that in my life that I do to live a better life. It's easy for us to say, this is how I live my life and screw everybody else, but we know that that's not conducive to living and leading a fulfilling life because there are many who came before us and there are many lessons and theories and ideas and equations and stories that we can draw upon to lead a better life for ourselves. Okay? Now, with that said, my opinion on this particular day has to do with what I consider to be the worst invention and the most damaging invention ever made by human beings. If I were to say, what was the worst thing ever invented? I think a lot of folks would probably think of nuclear weapons or uh, maybe even the internet. Even though the internet has brought us closer together and given us more data and information we could ever hope to ever even begin to touch, we're starting to realize that there's only so much you can do with it. And even if you can sort through the bullshit and find the truth, it seldom matters. What really matters are the very basic things in our lives: family, friends, connections, relationships, goals, happiness, whatever you might deem to be satisfactory in your own life. Okay. So the most evil thing and the worst and most damaging thing ever invented by humans, in my opinion, was the mechanical clock. This was such a small invention in the big picture. You add some gears and levers and you get a little dial to move at a certain rate, which coincides with the day hours, and boom, hey, there you've got it. You have time. Humans invented time. And I don't mean that without it, the days wouldn't pass on and we wouldn't all get old and die anyway. But inventing time means that you set a certain amount of increments, you segment the day into certain increments. And due to this, many of these other things, like nuclear proliferation, for example, nuclear weapons could not exist without time. We wouldn't have been able to develop many of the technologies that we have without having a clock. So we can measure, say, how long uranium is exposed to whatever. You get the gist of it, right? I'm not a nuclear scientist here. But this epiphany that I had was about time specifically as we see it. And it was this short video I was watching which really kind of inspired me to make this, and it was talking about the tyranny of time and how before clocks were invented, there was a period of time, I think it was back in the 1500s maybe, I don't recall exactly, but imagine what it was like to go to work in a time when there were no clocks. It was a fascinating story about how Monday and Tuesday were considered slow days. Wednesday was kind of halfway through, and Thursday and Friday were fast days. And how it was the church who actually brought Sundays as a holiday because there was a certain point where people employers wanted people to work 7 days a week. You know, basically work has become what defines us as humans, whether we like it or not. Like, what do you do for a living? You know, does that really matter? No, not really. I mean, it matters as much in as far as I work this job and this is what I know, but that doesn't define you. When people ask, what do you do? I say, I think, you know, or I philosophize, or I father, I parent, I husband. But to define myself by my work as a carpenter wouldn't really, I guess it just wouldn't be, it wouldn't feel right. But the idea that when I get up in the morning, I have an alarm that goes off. Then I have to get ready, looking at the clock, making sure I leave at a certain time to avoid traffic, to get to work. Then I clock in, I look at this clock, I work till the end of the day, I clock out, then I go home, I worry about the time I'm in traffic, the time I'm doing this, the time I'm doing that. I look ahead in the schedules and say, oh, on this date, at this time, I've got to do this. All of this is pretty bullshit. And we have been hoodwinked into believing that that's just how things are. Because it is how things are now. But how things have to be, rather. I completely disagree with the assessment that humans should work a 40-hour work week or a 60 or 80-hour work week, and that life is just about getting ahead. I saw a video. I didn't watch the video, but I saw it in my recommended list. And it was a guy, I think his name's Dan Coe, K-O-E. But he does kind of these, what do you call them? I guess, inspirational, or, you know, this is how you get rich. And there was a video title I saw yesterday, which was like, it said, you should be rich and you should get rich, why you should get rich in your 20s and get wealthy. And I thought, oh man, how ignorant for people to think at their age, a younger age, that by getting wealthy in your 20s, you're going to be a happier person in your older years. Maybe that's true for some people, but earning money does not in any way equate to contentment. It can bring brief happiness. You can have money to buy the things you want. But when I was growing up, we didn't have this window into the lives of the wealthy, the lives of the famous. We just assumed, or many assumed, that these people were happy, or that they were content, and that that's what everybody should aspire to. And I thought that by the time I was older, people would have grown out of this and realized, wait, being wealthy and famous doesn't make you happier. It just makes you more stressed out because you have more money, more bullshit to maintain. Let's say I have 3 properties. Some people say I'd love to have like 3 houses and beach houses and other places. That might be awesome. But at the same time, that's something in the back of your mind that you always have to deal with, right? So not to get off track here, but of course all of my videos are just, you know, off the cuff. So I don't have a scheduled discussion here. But the tyranny of time became very pronounced after clocks were invented. And employers, people used to just kind of work whatever hours they could, right? And when I said Mondays and Tuesdays were slow days, that meant they would work like a couple hours, then take a half-hour break, then work a couple more hours, then take maybe an hour and a half break. There was a time, you know, centuries ago where people would take call it a siesta if you want, but a nap at work, because work was not taken that seriously. And not only that, but you worked within the, you know, the parameters of what you had available to you. If it was winter, people chilled out more. It's like, well, the harvest is in, we did all the hard work, we got all the things, you know, that we needed set up and prepared for the winter. Most of the time was spent working at home and getting things done. And part of your time was spent helping others to make income. We seem to have tagged and identified how hard you work as being your value to society, instead of acknowledging the fact that what really matters is, what is your value to your family, your people, your friends? I know many people who have worked, countless hours, working long weeks, traveling a lot, so they can provide for their family. This is understandable because it takes a lot of effort to feed, house, and clothe our families. But what about the guy who flies around and comes home like one day a week, or is only home for a couple hours a night, and never really gets to see his kids grow up, never really gets to interact with those people in his life? And this is, of course, coming from a person who believes that relationships are what matter the most. That's my opinion. There are others out there who say, it doesn't matter, I just do things for myself. And that's great. If that truly makes you happy, I think that's wonderful. But from my own analysis of human nature, I don't think that makes us happy. I don't think any amount of money could make a person happy. And that's shown by billionaires who work consistently and become addicted and love their work for the sake of how much money they're making, while never really getting to enjoy the money that they make. It becomes, your money becomes your family in a way. And so anyhow, once the clocks were invented, to back up here for a minute, if you look back at the earliest stories of once pocket watches became available to the general public, you see employers would have you clock in and clock out at certain times, take your lunch, whatever it might be, as the Industrial Revolution took hold. And employers were very bothered by the fact that people weren't there at a certain time. And once they had clocks on the wall, you were expected to show up at that time. Makes sense. However, what's neglected is that a lot of these employers, these big companies back in the day, would actually connect their clocks to, let's say, the machine line, like in the 1800s. If something went wrong with the machine, it would shut the clock off. In other words, people would end up working more hours than they thought they were working because they didn't know any better. And then sometime later, when pocket watches became available to the general public, people started bringing them to work. And then they would compare them to the time clock and realize, wait a minute, this isn't correct. The time clock is off. So what did they do? Did employers improve the working conditions and fix the clocks and make them normal? No, of course. They fired anybody who brought a pocket watch to work. This is an interesting little tidbit of history. They forbade, this was in Britain, they forbade people from bringing pocket watches to work because they were calling their employers out. This was a switch from this older way of doing things, right? I have to tiptoe around the terms that I use, but it was more socialist in that sense. But once capitalism really took hold, as in profit being the main motive, time became tyranny. And it became a way for you to control people and tell them, this is when you have to be here, this is when you can clock out. I just can't overcome this. At almost 50 years old, I still cannot manage to convince myself that humans have done the right thing in creating these 40-hour work weeks. If you look at Britain, or you look at Europe in general, I should say, I don't know if in the UK they still do this, but the 30-hour work week in lots of parts of Europe are considered a very normal work week. 30 hours. 25% less than we work here in the West. And this is hard because if you say that I only want to work a 30-hour work week, what word comes to mind? Lazy. And that bothers me because laziness is not the same as time for yourself. Laziness is ignoring your responsibilities and not getting up when you need to. All of us have done that at one time or another, but generally most people, and this is what I found in my assessment, is that most people want to work, most people want to provide, most people want to be recognized as somebody who has good work ethic. My mom raised me and taught me that work ethic is important and that you should put in the best effort you can, try to shine as an employee, and I still do to this very day. When nobody's watching me at work, When the boss is gone, which actually the boss is never there, I'm basically a journeyman carpenter. I go out to job sites and I do what I'm told to do. And nobody questions how long it takes. If I spend all day doing one little piece of trim, so be it. You know, that's my choice. And I can say this is how long it took me to do this. But I work my ass off. I don't stop. I don't slack. I still work hard. And this is because if somebody's paying me money out of their pocket and I've agreed to work for them, I'm going to be working during that time. So I understand work ethic. And it's not that people don't want to work. It's that people don't like being chained to a fucking clock. There's no way around it. So we got to this age where progress and productivity became the norm. And this is how we got to our modern capitalist society, which, let me just make this clear, I'm not opposed to capitalism. I'm opposed to crony capitalism. A lot of folks, I've seen videos where people just completely diss, any type of capitalist. We've got to go socialist and we've got to have socialist policies. Look, we do. We have schools, we have fire departments, we have police, we have roads that are maintained. Many of these things need to be fixed. We have infrastructure issues. We have shortages of cash that should be spent on fixing our own country that are sent overseas to other countries, and weapons and missiles. And yeah, I won't get into that. But the old America First thing makes you sound like some kind of a right-wing nut job. But that's how I feel. Not because we're the only one that matters, but because it's the same thing I was taught as a human being. If you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of others. So being selfish, being egotistical to an extent is important. But once you have what you need to survive, then you can help others with a better attitude about it. If you give away everything you own and you live in squalor, that's great, but you're not going to be in the right mindset to actually help people. But this idea that progress and productivity are what drive us as human beings is total bullshit. And it's funny because, as I mentioned, this is the idea that I'm kind of dismissing this, many of the ideas that are kind of to the right of center. But as far as to the left, there's an equal problem with people who want progress in a different way. They want socialism, even though socialism means that the government's in charge. There's no way around it. Socialism will not work in a country like the US because basically there are no real socialist countries that have succeeded, but it's not that I'm against helping people or helping each other. It's that it should be done in the proper conditions, that people, I believe most people want to help others, that most people are willing to stick their neck out and put in some extra effort to make sure things work right in their neighborhood, their community, their state, their country, that we don't give people enough credit. And therefore, time has become the trap. This is what needs to happen at this time. This is what needs to happen at this time. And the unfortunate factor is that people who are very driven, power-hungry people, they spend all of their time trying to get others to live the way they want. I wanted to go into some stories about this one particular guy in this one particular town over in early Britain who basically convinced the church. He paid the church, this business owner, to ring the church bell at 4 a.m. and 8 p.m. And this was to make sure people were awake 4 hours before work because he wanted to make sure people got to work on time and that they went to bed at 8 o'clock. The 8 o'clock bell was to go to bed so you can wake up and come back to work. And he paid the church to do this. And if he would go knock on people's doors at 4 if they didn't wake up, be like, get up, it's time to, go to work. This attitude that one guy who has this drive for progress, often is just about progress for the sake of him putting more money in his pocket. But sometimes it's just because people are programmed that way. Sometimes it's not about greed. It's not about money. It's just people looking at others and saying, you should live your life this way. And many of these people are the clock watchers. I honestly would, I abhor any type of alarm. I hate waking up to alarms. Usually I wake up about 2 minutes before my alarm goes off, about 6 a.m. And that's because probably subconsciously I don't want to deal with it. But as I said, the power hungry have the not only the the money and the power, but they have the time to try to destroy other people's freedoms in order to make sure that the bottom line is met. I didn't finish what I was saying about leftism and progressivism. The idea that sometimes people say, well, we need to change, we need to be progressive, but don't exactly explain what that means. It's like, well, why do we have to progress? And are we progressing in a way that's beneficial to people? It seems like progress today is about taking away more and more freedoms to make sure that more and more people feel secure and safe and comfortable. It reminds me of a quote. I think it was Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin. It doesn't matter because every time you quote somebody, it's the wrong person or the wrong quote. But he says, those who are willing to sacrifice their freedoms for safety and security deserve neither. Something like that. If you're willing to sacrifice any of your freedoms, your freedom of speech, your freedom to roam, in order for a little bit of security, then you're wrong. You've done it wrong. That each individual has to have full freedom and autonomy. This came up in a discussion earlier about free speech, when Americans were asked, do you think certain speech, or do you think the First Amendment goes too far? It was, I think, 31% of Americans thought that the First Amendment goes too far. Basically meaning that there's certain things that shouldn't be allowed to say. But it went on to ask them, do you think that, say, college professors that harbor opinions that are offensive, do you think that they should be fired or not allowed to work at colleges? 69% of people said yes, that they should be able to fire a person for their viewpoints. And there were several other numbers in there. And yes, these are just polls. What do they matter? The point being that I feel like we're becoming weaker. And this is because we're trapped. We're trapped by time. We're trapped by the clock. It's allowed us to produce more and more bullshit. And it can be sad at times. It can be really sad. What do we leave behind is what matters. And this is my opinion, of course. It's what kind of a person do we want to be remembered as? And what kind of people do we want to raise as far as our kids? And what kind of friends do we want to have? You know, what kind of relationships can we build in this life? Because shit gets complicated fast. You know, at my age, I feel like I have so much more time to learn and so much more wisdom to gain. Yet, looking back at the ignorance of my youth, I realized I had some shit figured out. And sometimes it's like, where's that gusto from our youth where we had all these motivation and self-assuredness? Well, that's just ego. You start to see that things aren't the way that you thought they were. And that's okay. You got to roll with it. You got to move forward. But there's certain things that we often ignore or are just ignorant about. And that would be things like the worst invention ever made, which was the mechanical clock. It caused us to go for more and more and more. We're constantly driving for more, and I feel completely out of place in this world. And I know a lot of you feel the same way. I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I was born in either the wrong time or the wrong place, the wrong generation, whatever it might be. That maybe this is just kind of a human feeling condition, but I would give up all of the conveniences, modern conveniences, to live in a time where people cared about one another and just lived in happy communities. I could live on a commune. I could live with very little. I'm not a consumer. I don't buy stuff. I have an old car. I buy used phones if I need one, and I'll use it until the screen is so cracked I can't see it. Like, I'm the kind of guy who is basically lives as if I'm dirt poor. And I'm not dirt poor, but I ain't wealthy. I mean, I work paycheck to paycheck like everyone else. And but it's not about stuff. And it's the tyranny of time, which allowed us to create so many new products and convince people to be consumers in this society. And it's crazy. Sometimes I step back and I'm like, wow, this world's really fucked up. But then part of me says, don't think of it that way. It is what it is. You can't romanticize the past. Just because things seemed like they were better in the past doesn't mean they were. Don't believe me. I like electricity. I like technology. But, anyway, that's my ramble for the day, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Be well. It's about time for me to go. Peace.